Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is now in custody at The Hague. His arrest by the International Criminal Court, or ICC, is a rare global first, being the only Southeast Asian head of state to be arrested by the ICC to date, and the fifth head of state wanted by the court after Omar al-Bashir, ex-Sudanese president, the late Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, Vladimir Putin, incumbent president of the Russian Federation, and Benjamin Netanyahu, prime minister of Israel. But among all these high-profile criminals, except Gaddafi, who was executed in 2011, Duterte was the only one in custody today. The warrant was issued in secret, and the arrest swiftly completed, a first for the ICC. International analysts say it sets a precedent for future arrests of high-ranking leaders, albeit unlikely for the likes of Netanyahu and Putin. In fact, Netanyahu was just welcomed by Hungary in April, and instead of deporting Israel's wanted leader to The Hague, Hungary decided to quit the ICC, completely cutting off any such obligations in the future. You see, it takes a cooperative government, political will, and timing to pull off something like arresting a nation's leader. This video isn't about legal jargon or gruesome details. It ponders and expands from the question: what made Duterte's arrest possible to begin with? And why did justice catch up with him while others are still running free? Welcome to the Take Tank, where we don't just echo what's already being said. We're all about open discourse here. No gatekeeping, no echo chambers. This is part 1 of a 2-part series on the ICC, Duterte, and the politics of international justice. Today, we zoom out to understand how the court works and why its reach is powerful but painfully selective. In part 2, we zoom back into the Philippines, the politics, and the personal downfall of Rodrigo Duterte. So, take your time and take this take. To make sense of the international landscape that made Duterte's prosecution possible, let's start with the ICC and then we'll go through its limitations. The ICC had its origins in the Nuremberg trials and the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in the aftermath of World War II. It prosecuted leading Nazis for the Holocaust and members of the Japanese Imperial Army for atrocities committed across Asia. Building on these precedents, the ICC was formally established in 2002 under the Rome Statute to prosecute individuals for genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. As of January 2025, the court admitted its latest member, Ukraine, making it the 125th state party to the Rome Statute. It means that crimes committed by individuals within its territory are under the ICC's jurisdiction. Note that the ICC prosecutes individuals, not states. It is a separate entity from the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, which provides legal opinions and binding dispute settlements between and among states. Since its creation, the court has opened 33 cases, 12 investigations, and 69 defendants, 30 of whom are still at large. But where are these cases coming from, and who are being charged? Zooming out of the Philippines, most ICC prosecutions target Africa. Out of all this, only Israel is considered a developed economy, and Russia is a Security Council permanent member. To bring out the pattern clearer, This map visually represents the ICC indictments over the years by nationality, including open investigations, pending cases, acquittals, and convictions. The real numbers you see on the side refer to the number of charged individuals per country. A quick overview of this overwhelming map. Not all ICC cases involve leaders turning on their own. Some prefer to export their humanitarian disasters. Take Russia in Ukraine, Israel in Palestine, and Rwanda's meddling in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Global reach, local consequences. Meanwhile, in cases like Burundi, Bangladesh/Myanmar, and Venezuela, the ICC still has not named, much less indicted, a single accused individual. Well, you could say, these are the most pending of the pending cases. Investigations are either incomplete or just stuck in that cozy little place called diplomatic limbo. We'll unpack the details of these cases shortly. But first, let's head to the ICC's usual topic, Africa, where the court's record is, let's say, especially consistent. Libya tops the list with 12 charged individuals. Aside from Muammar Gaddafi, who died, still at large are his son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, and top officials since 2011. Nobody even flew into The Hague to this day. Then, Kenya has 9 accused people related to post-election violence incited by ex-President Uhuru Kenyatta. But his government made it almost impossible for the ICC investigation by withholding evidence, bribing witnesses, and inciting anti-imperialist nationalism. So all charges withdrawn. Kenyatta was a success story, ultimately forcing the ICC to leave his case altogether as a head of state, unlike Duterte, who no longer had presidential powers to protect himself when he was surrendered. We'll talk more about this dynamic in part 2 of the video. For the Central African Republic, 2 cases had been closed, ending with the acquittal of Jean-Pierre Bemba for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Still, he was convicted of obstruction of justice, which allowed him to tamper with his first case that led to his acquittal. It seems the ICC prosecutor never let him off the hook. Elsewhere, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, and Rwanda have each seen 2 to 3 defendants indicted, mostly for war crimes during internal conflicts. From the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda are the most wanted criminals. The Congolese, Bosco Ntaganda, convicted in 2018, and still on the run for 2 decades now, since 2005, the warlord Joseph Kony. It won't be a surprise that the ICC has lost interest in him, to be honest. The ICC's reach is global, but scrutiny isn't evenly applied, it seems. Without context, what would you think the name of this map is? Share your thoughts in the comments. The ICC was born out of Nuremberg, so if it is meant to deliver global justice, why does it feel so selective? Well, it's not just about politics, and it's likely not intentional, right? The ICC is boxed within real, legal, and structural limitations baked into its system. Well, international law, in essence and in practice, can be ruthlessly sharp, pun intended. So, creativity and a bit of luck had been necessary to uphold global justice. Let's break it down. First, jurisdictional gaps. The ICC cannot investigate crimes and make an arrest in non ICC member countries. This is probably the most common legal limit of the ICC. But because it's so common, how has the ICC navigated this legal bound in previous cases? Well, the Rome Statute has provisions to do just this. One way is a referral by the United Nations Security Council or the UNSC. As long as it's not vetoed by any of its permanent members or the P5, three of which aren't even ICC members or state parties to the Rome Statute. These are China, Russia, and the United States. This route was taken to indict the Sudanese dictator Omar al-Bashir for alleged crimes against humanity and genocide he committed in Darfur. A referral by the UNSC was also applied in Libya to prosecute Muammar Gaddafi for war crimes arising from the 2011 Libyan revolution, although his warrant was dropped upon his death. The other suspects, like his son, remain at large to this day. The downfall of the Responsibility to Protect, or R2P, exposes how ICC referrals by the UNSC are often driven by politics. In Libya, many argue that the R2P that justified the NATO interventions led by the US, France, and the UK ultimately did more harm than Gaddafi's regime. This debate deserves a separate discussion of its own, but in the context of the UNSC's role in the ICC, it's a clear sign that power, whether just or unjust, matters in humanitarian accountability. On another occasion, the veto power of the P5 can shield some allies or themselves from scrutiny. This was apparent in the war in Syria and the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar, both countries not members of the ICC. China and Russia vetoed referrals to probe Bashar al-Assad, who caused over 600,000 deaths and displacement of 14 million Syrians since the civil war in 2011. China's veto power likewise threatened any moves to prosecute the Myanmar government for its state-sanctioned genocide, a crisis that forced a mass exodus of over 700,000 Rohingyans to nearby territories like Bangladesh. However, the ICC found another way to avoid power plays in the Security Council by building a jurisdiction around an ICC member territory where the crime or elements of the crime were committed. So what they did was look at border crimes committed against the displaced Rohingyans who were forced to take refuge from Myanmar to Bangladesh, an ICC member. So, we're given with Bangladesh/Myanmar as its official case title in the ICC. But no Bangladeshi suspects here. The ICC simply used its membership as a legal doorway to investigate Myanmar's military on the Rohingya crisis, a case built more on jurisdictional gymnastics thanks to the ICC more than the cooperation of countries, except of course Bangladesh, that accepted Rohingya refugees and ICC jurisdiction in its territory. The catch though? This undermines the crimes from genocide to mere illegal deportation, but it opened nonetheless ongoing investigations on the humanitarian crisis suffered by the Rohingyans, a landmark case that managed to act on crimes by a non-ICC member independent of the UNSC. The situation in Ukraine is a different story. Like Russia, Ukraine wasn't a state party to the Rome Statute when it was invaded by Russia in February 24, 2022. It was only in January 1, 2025 that Ukraine officially became a member of the ICC. So, how did the ICC investigate crimes involving non-state parties to the Rome Statute? And one of them, armed with a veto power in the UNSC? According to the Rome Statute, A non-ICC state party may open ad hoc jurisdiction for the ICC. This is exactly what Ukraine did. So in March 2023, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova for the alleged war crime of unlawful deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. This is one example the ICC can break through legal barriers. But as seen with Myanmar, this approach may trap humanitarian violations as severe as genocide within legal technicalities. This reveals a grim reality. The protection of human rights often depends on political convenience then. Even if a government ratifies treaties like the Rome Statute, real politics can dictate whether ICC obligations are honored or entirely ignored by these countries. In some cases, leaders can commit grave abuses and still walk free, which brings us to another major limitation of the ICC. It's not just constrained by the law, but by material capacity. The ICC is overwhelmed and underfunded. Like other international organizations, it is reliant on state parties to operate. If you're thinking that's sauce, you're right, because it adds vulnerability to geopolitics. That means only a select few cases may get attention, and in some situations, they're not even the most urgent. Preliminary probes may take years just to process. Notably, in 2021, the ICC deprioritized investigations into war crimes allegedly committed by American and Afghan government forces, choosing instead to focus on crimes committed by the Taliban and the Islamic State in Khorasan province. As if this wasn't bad enough, Donald Trump sanctioned then prosecutor Ms. Fatou Bensouda when the Afghanistan case was reopened in 2020. The court closed its inquiry into alleged war crimes by British troops in Iraq, citing insufficient domestic investigations in the UK. Venezuela is especially crawling with two phases, both allegations happening since 2014, a decade ago. And yet the ICC has not announced any indictments or suspects to this day. Its second case points to the United States as the one responsible for economic sanctions, which, according to Nicolas Maduro, helped exacerbate the humanitarian crisis at the heart of its first case at the ICC, which was perpetrated by his own government. A bit of a feedback loop, really. Let's just hope ICC can make tangible progress on Venezuela before GTA 6 is released. What do you think? Comment down below if the US should take the blame too. But for real though, that's a long shot because the ICC isn't designed to punish economic sanctions. So notwithstanding the merits of the allegation, in practice, the ICC has to choose its battles. Thus, we wouldn't really know if merits hold ground if the case is not a top priority of investigation. Bottom line, the ICC's reach is wide but far from equal. It's justice with a lot of fine print and politics. That's because the ICC isn't just a court, it's also a player in a political game. Prosecutors often weigh the risks. Will issuing a warrant backfire diplomatically? Will it even be enforced? Sometimes, pursuing justice means choosing your struggles. But even when the ICC does prioritize a case, that's only half the battle, because no matter how damning the evidence, the court cannot act alone. That brings us to the next major hurdle: dependence on state cooperation, which, as history shows, can be as political and selective as justice itself. but in rare moments, that same politics can unexpectedly work for the victims, albeit delayed. The Philippines is one such case, which will continue on to part 2 of this video, the last limitation of the ICC, state cooperation, the case of Rodrigo Duterte. There, we trace how domestic politics, when it should be justice, ultimately brought Duterte to The Hague. The betrayals, the back channels, and the fractured alliances that made the impossible possible. Because after all, the ICC can only issue warrants, but it cannot make arrests on its own as international law dictates. If you haven't gone to part 2 video yet, but part 1 already made you think so far, comment your take below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Take Tank to help us continue the mission of delivering critically informed and independent storytelling about things that matter. Tune in for part 2.